Urgent chance, Om Suji and this is what if everything went perfect for India? That's a possible history. Yeah, okay. Obviously, I'm an Indian, so it's gonna be an interesting video to see, I guess. I don't know what it means. Like, what if Mongols? Yeah, sure, I'm kind of Mongols. Mughals never invaded India. British never invaded, which is like, why would they not? If somebody can do something, they always do. That's how the history goes, right? What maybe Indians arm themselves early? Again, how would that work? India was like really divisive for a long time. Just the structure, caste system, everything worked. Like, yeah, people want like this centralized China type, like centralized emperor type shit wasn't there, right? Like there were rise and falls of like many kings, but yeah, I don't know. So feels like alternate history that would never happen, but I'm guessing that's what's gonna be. That's what it. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. So I know which type of videos to do tomorrow. I like watching history videos. Obviously, that's how I started my channel. So yeah, I try to do anything that interests me. I guess I don't know, or YouTube recommends me. But yeah, if you want me to do any specific video, comment down and let's do it.
India has had a rough modern history. They were colonized by the British for over 2 centuries, in which the subcontinent was exploited, starved and used to further British interests. Before colonization, India held about 20% of the world's GDP. Upon independence, this was less than 5. Safe to say, colonization wasn't...
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at it today, like where India is, how resources India had and still have, look at the dominance of like many things like spice and everything. It makes sense that India held a lot of like GDPs and knowing like how, like how long time ago where people migrated into India and like it just makes sense, right? So yeah, after British Empire and like everything was looted and everything, like more than looted, it just like everything was like kind of like suppressed. Yeah, GDP would suffer like that.
Wasn't great for the subcontinent. But in 1947, after Indian soldiers had distinguished themselves greatly in both world wars, Britain finally left the subcontinent in a hasty fashion. The region would be divided between Hindu India and Muslim Pakistan, and following independence, these two powers have consistently fought each other, dragging each other down, only benefiting their competitors. This leaves the question for today: what if instead everything went as perfect as realistically possible for modern India? As the first and most important change, we will not have this subcontinent split happen. Upon independence, the entire Indian subcontinent is one
What the hell's with the Bulgaria?
big nation into the Cold War. This does raise the question though, why did they split in the first place? Britain didn't really have the best track record for caring about ethnicity or religion while leaving their other colonies. What made India different? Well, the founders of India did indeed fight for a unified subcontinent, but it were the leaders of the Muslims that, perhaps rightfully, fought against this unified state, believing that the interests of the Muslims would be better served in their own state since they would become a minority group within Hindu-dominated India otherwise. So, the British agreed with the Muslims and the two states of our timeline were born. Upon independence, India became a decentralized state. This makes sense considering that they have 450 different languages. Hindu may be
Really attracted because I don't even believe that number. Could be much more than that. All right. Yeah, what is a language, right? Like sometimes even like accents and tongues could differentiate a language. Sometimes the same language feels different because people speak it differently, and somebody's like, "Oh, that's a different language." Like, okay.
maybe the dominant language, but it's absolutely not universal, and it's not even a majority in the nation. In terms of religion, India right now is already the third largest Muslim nation on earth, with 15% of their population being Muslims. Only Pakistan and Indonesia have more Muslims than India.
Is it 15? Well, that number was smaller, wasn't it? I don't know. But yeah, that's a big fucking number if you know, like, it's 1.4 billion people. So yeah, 15 is like, yeah, majority enough.
Why do I mention all this? To hammer home that India is already one of the most diverse nations on earth, and the addition of Pakistan may be much less catastrophic.
Yeah, that's, again, I don't want to pause too much. But, like, there's always some Western media talking about, like, friction happening in India. India is the most diverse place on the planet. Like you said, like even 15% of population, but it's 15% out of 1.4 billion. Not to mention there's many different type of people like Parsi and everything, like, way too many different people here, right? So the friction that is happening is obviously fucked up, but it's not as worse as could have been, right? Or it's not as worse as it was. Nowadays, yes, sometimes there's like a dominating news, like some kind of friction happen. But the level of people that are here, the level of diversity it has, it probably would have been much worse. So India has stability more than people would think.
Than one may imagine. India, upon its founding, would need to ensure some concessions for the Muslims within it, but due to their decentralized and tolerant nature upon founding, I have no doubt that this alternate India could work. And immediately upon independence, this alternate India gets off to a significantly calmer start. In our timeline, up to 20 million people had to move between the two newly created states, and violence on the local level would cause millions to die. While some of these conflicts would absolutely still happen, they would be far, far less impactful, as within a unified India, there is simply no reason to immediately pack your things and move. But perhaps most crucially, we have removed 4 wars and constant tensions and clashes over Kashmir, a disputed territory between India and Pakistan in our timeline. This rivalry would cause both sides to develop nuclear weapons, and both sides would constantly support dissidents in the other. India would help Bangladesh to break away from Pakistan after the Pakistanis murdered millions of Bengalis, while Pakistan would support terrorist organizations within India. Over time, Pakistan as a nation became little more than a stick for the Americans and Chinese to keep the Indian tiger down with. Right now, in the modern day, China has practically surrounded the Indians with their own sphere of influence, blocking Indian attempts to leverage their coast on the Indian Ocean trade routes by using alternative ports in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So, for all these reasons and more,
I mean, Indian Navy is still dominant in the Indian Ocean. It's not, China is powerful, but China cannot, show force at that level at Indian shores, right? Yes, they're trying to do these clever tricks of like putting ports in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and trying to like, close the, the whole area like that. But no, the dominance of Indian Navy is still there, right? So China can just suddenly decide to do something like, yeah, they're gonna get, their ass gonna be kicked with the Indian Navy, right? China is much more powerful than India, obviously, but not at the local level like this. Indian coast are like enough, like India Navy is projecting enough power there.
the announcement of one big Indian dominion in 1947 is massive for Indian power into the future. But it was now time for the Indian and Muslim leaders of the subcontinent to come together and actually forge the blueprint for this new state. This would likely entail more autonomy for Muslim-dominated states and explicit religious protections and equality. With that, we have a bigger but more decentralized India. How do they move into this new Cold War?
Yeah, none of this would ever happen. Like, yeah, okay, no religious war, kumbaya. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, this. I'm laughing because like every single topics that he said. Like, imagine if this happened. Now that would not happen. If you studied any history of any of this, you know there's no way in hell that would happen.
Sorry for the quick interruption, but most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so, and maybe like and comment too. Thank you. In our own timeline's Cold War, we have India aligning itself with neither side, and I don't see this changing too much. After centuries of colonization, India needs to figure out who they are as a nation. It may sound obvious, but India is not China, which is a mostly uniform and decentralized state. India needs to nation build, deal with their Muslim and ethnic separatism, squabble with China over border disputes, ensure the return of their final colonial holdings, etc. In this climate, India has more than enough on their plate internally to decisively pick one side of the Cold War over the other. And overall, India's experience during the Cold War is significantly calmer, as they are not being constantly tested by Pakistan. Politically, India would develop itself into a strong, democratic state, while economically, the subcontinent is much better off too, as India's neighbors can't siphon off trade as easily, and closer regional integration further boosts their internal development. The specifics are hard to predict, but even if we change nothing else, this alternate India will be much more prosperous. border conflicts with the Chinese over disputed territories 2 favor the Indians far more in this timeline, since the Indian-Pakistani conflicts don't take up the focus of the Indian military, meaning that China would have a far harder time pushing them around. But in terms of specifics, India's biggest direct influence on the Cold War would come during the Soviet-Afghan War.
See, the problem with all this is like US India had a good relation for a long time back then, but then because of the Cold War, US switched to China because like it was an easier thing because it can contain Soviet Union in a way. For them, it was like, oh, this is a good decision. So China versus India was always going to be a thing. So as soon as US backs China, inevitably India would have gone to Soviet Union like they did, right? So not picking a side, it feels kind of weird. That wouldn't happen. I think it would play out the same way. India would still go towards the Soviet Union, but China or US goes to China, and basically that kind of like a relationship would develop. Over time, China will get richer because they have a decent relationship with US, and now economical relationship would rise the way it did. India would still have relationship with Soviet Union the way it did, and they would still move forward the way they are doing, I guess. So economically, I don't think much would change. China would still get powerful because of the US, and US's money, right? So I don't know.
The Americans wanted to provide aid to the anti-Soviet elements in the nation, but since Afghanistan is landlocked, this was a difficult task. In our own timeline, the Americans solved this by providing the weapons and aid to Pakistan first, who would then pass it on to Afghan rebels, choosing to give it to the more radical factions within the nation, leading to the extremist Afghanistan of our timeline. In this alternate timeline, America simply doesn't have this option. India, as a neutral party, simply wouldn't agree, and the only other option, Iran, has fallen out with America after the Iranian Revolution. This means that America supporting the Afghan rebels in any significant way is practically impossible, meaning the Soviets may just very well manage to win this war, or at least be far more capable in suppressing the worst of the revolt. This is a very crucial change, since the Afghan wars may have been the most significant ones in the modern era. It showed and weakened the Soviet Union in an era where they were already stagnating, while setting up some very unsavory groups I'm not allowed to name, which blew up some iconic American architecture on a specific date in September, ensuring America's war on terror and the modern world as we know it. Without Pakistan, it is very possible that this would all be butterflied away. Does this mean that the Soviets survive? No. Their issues ran way deeper than just Afghanistan, but the post-Soviet world is extremely different to our own. For India, the lack of a war in Afghanistan and the war on terror in general means a much more peaceful neighborhood, allowing India to work on more regional integration programs, many of which fell through due to conflicts in our own timeline. For example, India wanted to construct pipelines to Central Asian gas, but these failed due to Afghani and Pakistani conflicts. For India's
In this video, we are assuming that religious issues wouldn't rise, which is historically just not possible, right? Hindu versus Muslim or Islamic, yeah, that's never going away, right? Like that would always happen. So Pakistan always come, but even if you really think, like, okay, there is no Pakistan, or India is one whole, the neighbors are still Islamic, Muslim, and implying that this, like one nation of India still like somehow manages to have relationship with, no, there would be religious wars. There would be, if there is no wars, at least there is a bad relationship. So that, I don't see that happening, right? It's like, what if there was no religious war? What would happen then? This is like one of those things. Like that doesn't happen. That has not happened anywhere on the planet when it comes to any religion.
International relations.
It's like saying, what if there were no crusades? Like, okay, what?
It's also important to remember that they have about 30% of the entire world's Muslim population, which could greatly help Indian relations with the other Muslim states around the world. This could very well facilitate Indian relations with the energy giants of Arabia and the very populous nation of Indonesia. If India plays its cards right, it has a much easier time to build a diplomatic and economic network across the Indian Ocean. Similarly, without Pakistan and Bangladesh, India can take a much more assertive stance in relations with Central Asia and Southeast Asia. It is difficult to overstate how much India has been hurt by being physically encircled by hostile powers.
Yeah, I know people who say like, why are you talking like this, right? This is that video. Let's imagine video. I understand that, but the concept here, the point is said. If there was no Pakistan, Americans wouldn't have supplied Afghanistan, and like terrorism wouldn't exist today. Okay, this feels like one of those like one decision did this. If this didn't happen, there would be no terrorists. In that way, it makes sense. But this is not about one decision that ruined this relationship. Otherwise, everything would have gone perfect for India. There would be religious wars. It's impossible to coexist like that. If you see history, like even if there are one time, let's say India versus Pakistan wasn't created, later on something would have happened and religious friction would still be there. So this is not like one chance ruined everything or one decision ruined everything type of thing, right? If it were like that, it makes sense. But this all hinges on like, what if there were no religious friction? That doesn't work.
To further boost India's position, they are easily the most populous nation, taking over China's position way sooner than in our own timeline. Does this make India China's equal into the modern day? Unlikely. While India is significantly better off, India still has worse geography, a less unified population, a decentralized state and economy, etc. India is powerful, but China still has very significant advantages over it. So, to further help India along, I want to change their economic system. In our timeline, the Indians adopted a Soviet-inspired command economy where the government took charge of and subsidized industries which
Pass. Nope. I'm fine with the current state.
they considered important. But the general consensus is that India only hurt their economy long-term by subsidizing failing businesses. India keeping some aspects nationalized would be fine, but if we tone down India's planned economy, allowing for more economic freedoms, this would absolutely boost India long-term. With these changes, India by the modern day has already eclipsed most of the world's economies.
Yeah, okay. India could never adopt communistic approach because that's not how Indian population work. Have you ever come to India? Have you ever seen the divisive things? Have you watched the news? You probably won't understand. But that is English version of news, right? I don't know. Have you ever watched like that? India is, like you say, India is so diverse and like separate from everyone. This type of like centralized communistic approach of like we the people and then creating this communistic government doesn't really work in India, right? Democracy is working, like that's good. This is the thing. Democracy is like tolerance. That's what basically democracy is, right? Like creating government, finding solution with the like enough majority and like there you go, moving forward. In a way, it's a tolerance. India is one of those countries where democracy would work and nothing else would work because people are so different, right? It's tolerance.
Easily becoming the third largest economy behind only the United States and China. On an individual level, the average Indian is absolutely still poor. But the more India's development gets rolling, the more this too will change. And on the world stage, India would become one of the key players in international geopolitics. Right now, India is simply one of many American allies in Asia. An important one, but not a massive priority. In this alternate timeline, India is a player all by themselves, a massive hub of global trade. India is a key nation.
Yeah, I don't think you understand geographical politics at that level. Like India is in very unique position right now, where India can just like project independence in a way. Like we don't need any alliance. We don't even need Russia, even though like Russia is like one of the closest ally for years. Like even Putin's like, okay, fine, we understand, type of like trying to slowly back away, right? Look at what has happened since the war, right? How India has responded and how Russia has responded back. Like, I respect that type of way. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, right? So India is in a very unique position because of it is democratic country. China is not. China has a lot of problems with the Taiwan and things. Geographically, India is in a very unique position where it projects a lot of power, right? And it's now, right? And this video is a year old, so it's not like many year old. So yeah, this is not the dynamic right now. Right now, dynamic is very different, especially with the Modi government, right? And where they're leading when it comes to like geopolitics. It's really like, it's fun when you really like understand it and like really research it, but it's crucial in many sectors where you really need to like focus, where geographical and geopolitics, where India lies. It's very weird position.
In competition with America, Russia and China for Eurasian influence, likely retaining good relations with both Moscow and Washington, as both consider India too important to alienate. Personally, I would be very optimistic for this alternate India, as India turns itself into a true major power. While India's population is booming, China's population just peaked in 2023, and the coming demographic collapse will likely weigh heavily on them. Apart from that, the Chinese have a paranoid, authoritarian regime only accepted internationally because China is such an economic giant. India, with its responsible democracy, would have a much easier time maintaining relations with anyone they choose. We can expect that the more China's long-term issues come to bite them, the more India can overtake the economic and political role that China has been trying to fill. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next couple of decades, India begins to overtake China, taking its place as the preeminent Asian power. But rather than a repressive dictatorship, it's a tolerant and diverse democracy, leading the way for the rest of the continent. But that's where I'll end.
Yep, that was an interesting video. India is a power right now, global power. It's fifth economy on the planet out of 200, right? And ahead of it's like Germany and other countries. Yeah, slowly India's like moving in a way, and a young population is enough, like they're gonna overtake. So soon it's gonna be in top 3. That is a global power. If you're in top 5, you're a global power, right? You think like, okay, China has 20 trillion economy and India only has like 4 trillion. Difference is there is like China is a communistic country. They can dictate things. President for life, he can just like dictate things. India can't do that. India has a lot of diverse issues, a lot of like places where you can't really modernize things because religious and societal issues interfere. Government can just like force like, fuck you, do this. It's about the good of the country. India can't do that. So that's why we have 4 trillion. It could have easily be 10 plus trillion, 15 trillion if Indian government could do that. They can't. It's a democracy, right? Every single part of like this country is slowly modernizing, right? But the things around it, let's say some major city is really modernizing. Things around it, it's not going to be easy to modernize, and it's spread around the country. So it's not like some region of the country is really poor, some region of country is really rich. It's like spread around. Cities are spread around, and rural areas are also spread around, and there is like a major difference there. So the Indian government is insanely slow. When you like hear about like how things are moving, government is insanely slow, and because of this, you can't just force things. And it's good that you can force things. It's democracy. But when you compare India with China, there's a major issue there. China doesn't have to worry about red tape. China doesn't have to worry about anything. China can just say, oh, this is in the way, fuck it. Build the bridge and demolish that. Whoever guy lives there, I don't know, like give him some other house somewhere else. He'll be happy. India can't do that. A guy can literally go to like Supreme Court, High Court or something and like, no, this is my house, this is my rightful. Fuck your road. You can't build road here. Even with the eminent domain, you can't do that. And it will like drag into the court for like multiple decades. India can't just like speed ahead through like China does, right? So yeah, and India is a global power. It's the 5th economy on the planet, like really powerful military. If you compare it to US or China, of course, it's going to feel low. But remember, there are 200 countries on the planet. India is in very unique geographical position. If India versus China happens right now at Himalayas, China can't guarantee victory because of the geographical advantage that India has. Even though Indian military is not as powerful as China's. So it's like very uniqueness to it. Right, well, if you like my next one, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.